DBT, Emotion Regulation 2. As we mentioned in the last session, emotions are complex, full system responses, and changing any part of the system can change the entire response. So knowing the parts of an emotion can guide our efforts to change the emotion. Emotions are complex. They generally consist of several parts or different reactions happening at the same time. They're also automatic. They're involuntary, automatic responses to internal and external events. Emotions also can't be changed directly. We can change the events that cause emotional experiences, but we can't change emotional experiences directly. Emotions tend to occur suddenly, although the intensity of a particular emotion might build up slowly over time. They're also like waves in the sea, because they rise and fall. Most emotions only last from seconds to minutes. It's important for us to remember that emotions are self-perpetuating. Once an emotion starts, it keeps restarting itself. Emotions love themselves. In the next part of this session, we'll be looking at describing emotion. The first thing we have to think about when describing emotions is what was happening right before the emotion started. This is called the prompting event. This is the cue that sets off the emotion at that particular time, rather than at some other time. Prompting events can be internal, so a person's own thoughts, behaviours and physical reactions, or they can be external, so events in the environment, including things that people do. Events can prompt emotions automatically, without any thoughts about the event, and you can change emotions by changing prompting events through problem solving. A prompting event will not prompt an emotion if you're not aware that it actually happened. The event has to grab at least part of your attention to have an effect. There's no emotion without awareness. Even when an event is internal, so an emotion, an infection, or tense muscles, it will not prompt an emotion if you're not aware of it at some level. You can change emotions by distracting your attention away from prompting events. Think of the distraction skills we used in distress tolerance, Wise Mind Accepts. Often what sets off your emotion is the interpretation of the prompting event, not the event itself. Interpretations of thoughts, beliefs, or assumptions about an event, or appraisals of the event. When interpretations change, emotions can change too. Something else we need to think about is our vulnerability factors. These are conditions or events that make someone very sensitive to a prompting event, more likely to make emotional interpretations, and more biologically reactive to specific events. These can occur shortly before the prompting event, or they can occur in the distant past. The types of things that can make us vulnerable might include lack of sleep, drugs, alcohol, lack of food, sickness, mood-altering drugs, stress, etc. You can reduce negative emotions by reducing your current vulnerability factors. When emotions fire, several complex biological changes occur so quickly as to be simultaneous. Emotions involve neurochemical changes in the brain. Some parts of the brain appear to be very important in regulating emotions, and the brain changes can then have effects on the rest of the body. Emotions involve nervous system changes too. When we're under stress, the activating system, or the sympathetic nervous system, kicks in. It increases heart rate and blood pressure, cools the skin by sweating, increases the rate of breathing and activates the production of sugar to give us energy. It prepares us for actions right now. The other system, the parasympathetic nervous system, counteracts these actions by slowing down the body. When we're relaxed, this quieting aspect of the system takes over. Emotions are almost always associated with the experience of feeling sensations and with urges to do something. Both our feelings and our urges prompt us to act in some way. When we have emotions, we're actually sensing our brain and body changes. This is usually what's meant by an emotional experience. The experience of sensations can't be changed directly. If sensations we don't like could be changed directly, we'd get rid of all physical pain or emotions we find painful. But what would happen then? We wouldn't avoid dangerous situations. So if a child was lost, we wouldn't go out to find them. We might decide to give up on anger and not defend ourselves, or fight for the rights of others, and this would be a bit of a disaster. So when people tell you to stop feeling an emotion, it's like telling you to stop feeling the rain on your head, or the pain when someone hits you over the head with a hammer. The only way to stop feeling is to divert your attention or change some other aspect of your emotion. Although that's sometimes easy to do, It's sometimes next to impossible. One of the most important functions of emotions is to communicate. If it's to do that, an emotion has to be expressed. The facial expression of primary or basic emotions is hardwired into human beings. The importance of facial expressions in communicating with others is likely very important for our survival. Even when our faces can't be seen, our bodies can communicate emotions. Our posture can be relaxed, tensed, drooping, or shoulders back. Our hands can be clenched and tight, or open and relaxed. Each different posture sends a message to others about how and what we are feeling. We can change our emotions by changing our facial and body expressions. So if we're afraid or anxious, we can feel calmer by relaxing our muscles. It's important to note here that change in emotional expressions is very different from suppressing emotion. When you suppress an emotion, you're working hard to restrain or hold back a natural expression. It's like trying to smother the expressive part of your emotion. Suppressing emotions can actually lead to more extreme emotions. In contrast, when you change an emotional expression, you're replacing one expression with another. You're actively altering your muscles to modify your expression. One of the primary functions of emotions is to prepare the body for action. So an action itself could be thought of as part of an entire emotional response. You can change emotions by acting opposite to the emotion's action urge. This is something we'll work on later in the module. So how do we name our emotions? Well, every culture gives names to emotions. To name an emotion also requires awareness of the emotion. When we're communicating to others how we feel, it's important to be able to identify what emotion we're actually feeling, so that our communication will be accurate. You can change emotions by learning to be aware of and to name your emotions. Again, we'll work on this later in the module. Emotions can have powerful after effects on memory, thoughts, the ability to think, physical functioning, and our behaviour. For example, when we're afraid, we often become hypersensitive to any threat to our safety. Once you know that intense emotions narrow attention and increase sensitivity to cues for the same emotion, you can remind yourself to check the facts. Knowing that you might be seeing things through the lenses of the emotion you're trying to change, rather than the lenses of present reality, can be really helpful at this point. Now we're going to think about action urges. Emotions aren't actually actions, rather they're preparing us for actions. While it may seem that the emotional experience of anger or joy is so intensely experiential that the emotion itself is like an action, our emotions are really just getting us ready to take action. Try thinking of emotions as useful indicators that are trying to tell you something. An important thing that emotions do is to prompt behaviours. An action urge might be to fight or attack verbally in anger, or to flee or hide in fear. People might have different action urges for different emotions, but we'll discuss the most common ones for the primary emotions. Joy is an emotion that makes you want to do more of whatever activity you're taking part in. The action urge for guilt is to repair. The action urge for anger is often to fight or defend yourself. The action urge for fear is most often to run away or to flee. The action urge for shame is to hide. For disgust is to repel. For interest is to find out more. And for sadness is to seek comfort. Finally, we're just going to talk about secondary emotions. A central problem for people who experience very intense emotions is that they react to most negative emotions with secondary emotions of guilt, shame, or anger. These secondary emotions cause all sorts of problems. In particular, they confuse the picture and make identification and description of the primary emotions very difficult. The primary emotions are then overshadowed by the secondary emotions, and therefore problem solving in regard to the primary emotions is difficult. So this week's session has looked at describing emotions by looking at the different component parts of emotions, as well as action urges, and next week we'll look at changing emotional responses by checking the facts.